pledge of allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'd like to welcome all the public that has attended today. Please silence your cell phones, turn them off or silence them, or so they're not disruptive. And those that would like to address the commission on any agenda or item, you must fill out a blue sheet and return it to Mark Goki, who is right there. And we will call your name in order. So I'll turn the time over now to okay. And can we get a motion to approve the minutes for the July 2019 Commissioners meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Gary?
So, I'm sorry, who made the motion?
Galen, Richard? Motion, Galen seconded. Call to the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries, Sherry. Thank you. I'll now turn the time over to Director Nesvik. In just a minute.
Got my stuff.
All right, well, good afternoon, Mr. President, members of the commission. Welcome to Pinedale, Wyoming, and you've just landed in the middle of the second day of a big season opener in western Wyoming with the deer season. That's why, for those of you that stopped by the office, you probably realized there weren't very many employees there, and that's because this is the beginning of the really busy season starts a little bit earlier in western Wyoming because the seasons are a little bit earlier. So welcome to Pinedale. It's a great time of the year to be here. We specifically picked this location this time of the year so that those that wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to observe some of the goings-on this time of the year in this part of the world could do that. Along those lines, I think it's an appropriate time to remind the commission and the folks that are here gathered with us today of the 20th year of our Access Yes program. And we'll certainly be talking more about this over the coming couple of months, but thanks to the generosity of Wyoming landowners, we've enjoyed this program. Many thousands, hundreds of thousands of sportsman days have been enjoyed because Wyoming landowners have provided exceptional access to some of our diverse and very abundant wildlife resources across the state. So really the commission was certainly involved in this. We prioritized this 20th year anniversary and the communication of this event to the people of our state is a high priority for this year, and we'll be doing that over here this next couple of months or so, and we'll certainly talk a little bit more tonight about that. Quick update for the commission on wildlife crossings. Commissioner Crank and I had the opportunity to meet with the Transportation Commission in Cheyenne here. I don't know what it was, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, Pat, and we both had an opportunity to talk in front of that group, and they passed a resolution basically committing $1.25 million to the current crossing project that we have, and through that conversation there was a lot of support that we heard and that was asserted from that group towards wildlife crossings. They definitely understand why it's a priority for this commission and why it's a priority for the people of the state of Wyoming, and I feel good about their priority on this particular issue. You're going to get a good, thorough update in November on where we're at with aquatic invasive species, the entire effort right now, but one of the things I wanted to bring up today is our fish division folks fish management folks have put a lot of time and effort here over the last several months into both restructuring the AIS program to try to address some of our current needs without any additional people, but maybe more importantly, something that I talked to the commission about when I first started, and that is putting together the plans that are going to be extremely important if we ever do have AIS come into our state. These plans are going to be completed in draft form. We're going to talk to the public about them here close to the end of the year, maybe the first month of the new year in January. But our first, most highest priority waters, 8 waters total, we should have those plans complete here midwinter, and we'll move on to the next set of high priority waters around the state. Many of you may have heard we had the final meeting of the statewide 32-member CWD working group, basically a public working group. Had a couple members of the department, Commissioner Schmid from the commission on this group. They finalized a set of pretty long, exhaustive list of recommendations for our considerations. We haven't waded through all of those yet. Short synopsis, though, essentially, they did very, very good work. They analyzed this issue well. I think they gave us some pretty good places where we can look anew to try to find some answers and reduce the spread, reduce the prevalence, and maybe even look at some kind of a long-term solution to the problem. They certainly didn't find any silver bullets, and we didn't expect that. We didn't ask them for that, but we did ask them to look at what would be the best course for our state over the next several years. You'll be getting a more thorough update and presentation on that. We had good, a lot of our folks from within the department worked hard on that effort, and it's not complete yet. We're going to go back out to the public now and talk again. There was a first round of public meetings, and then the meetings of all, there was 3 total meetings with the working group. Those were open to the public, and now we're going to go back out to the public with their recommendations, and then we will be coming back to the commission and updating you on what the outcomes of all of those, all of that work is. And in addition to that, we'll be looking at the next move, which is to, in a separate way, address the issues in this part of the state, Pinedale, Jackson, Afton, with regards to feed grounds and how feed grounds play into the complexity of CWD, brucellosis, hunting opportunity, prevention of damage, all of the complexities in this part of the state. Along those lines, one of the things that, again, I told you that I would focus on 6 months ago was on trying to figure out a common statewide solution to, or set of solutions anyway, to carcass disposal. I think we're moving right along with that. I've had several meetings now with the other state agencies involved, and we will be convening. First, I'll be meeting with County Commissioners Association here at the end of this month, and then we will be convening kind of a public seminar or a public workshop to provide information to solid waste managers, those folks that manage those facilities, dumps essentially, and transfer stations, as well as county commissioners and municipalities here towards probably going to be in the November-December timeframe. And so that work continues, and it really works hand in hand with the work of the CWD working group, and many of their recommendations were premised on us being able to find a solution to carcass disposal. A quick update on the Wyoming Outdoor Hall of Fame. We've started work on that. We've retooled the selection committee for that particular effort. It's scheduled to be in March again in Cody, in conjunction with the commission meeting in Cody, and the deadline for nominations, I believe, is the end of November. Is that right, Sarah? December 3rd is the deadline for nominations, so we'll be seeking nominations and running those through the selection committee here in the next several months. I've sent a few things, I think, to all of the commission actually, on some updates with Wildlife. We now have the Sinks Canyon camera up. The bandwidth does not allow a continual streaming 24-hour a day camera, but it does record 24 hours a day. There is periods of the day where you can watch. This is where it comes out of the canyon, and there's opportunities to see lots of different wildlife as well as different fish. You see some of the fish there in this particular up on the screen. That camera actually just got going. The challenges with exporting bandwidth to this particular area were significantly more than what we expected. Our IT section actually spent days up there at the state park here, working with those folks and internet providers to get this up and running. But this is an illustration of what we hope to do in many, many places across the state. You've all seen, we've put a couple of new videos up, a black bear video and an osprey hunting video. That's received several views, and people are not watching these things like a lot of things on the internet where they go and watch them for, I think the average viewing time is like 9 seconds. These are long view periods, like 1 minute and 30 seconds, and so people are, when they pull these up, they're watching them. The other thing we got going now is we're installing more of the in-tank cameras at our hatcheries. Those have been popular. People have been watching those. We've got, I think I've mentioned this before, we're working with some private landowners to put up some, to put an eagle cam on private land so that people could go live and watch the eagle. One of the things we're learning too is that, you know, it depends on, a lot of these are very much based on the time of the year. So, for example, Trapper's Point isn't nearly as interesting to sit and watch that feed, other than about 2 months out of the year when animals are migrating. The rest of the year, there isn't a whole lot to see there. Same kind of thing with eagle cams. Same kind of thing with Sinks Canyon. It's not going to look the same throughout the whole year. So, you know, we're continuing to learn from this. We're continuing to learn the challenges. This is very much more. This is very much an IT and communications section product. I mean, they really can't make all this work without both of them having to work together. And so we've had to readjust workloads a little bit, reprioritize things, but we've got folks with this incorporated into their work schedule, and they're continuing to work on new stuff for us. I think the next thing that could have a lot of opportunity is something with migration, something where during those, you know, few weeks out of the year when animals are moving, that you could watch them on a live feed. And so that's the focus now. Last thing I'd have is I've had some questions about where we're at with grizzly bears, and essentially we've continued to be engaged with the other states on you know, discussions on where they're at and their position. We've had many discussions with Fish and Wildlife Service. Our appeal is still out there, and you know, there will be briefings and hearings on that. We expect to have some kind of a decision here, you know, if not a year from now, a little earlier than a year from now, on what the appeals court, what kind of direction, what kind of decision they're going to make specifically on our grizzly bear appeal. With that, Mr. President, I would ask if there are any questions.
Any questions?
Okay, so I've got the next agenda item too, if I may.
You bet, absolutely.
If you recall, we did a pretty good portion of the department awards at our last commission meeting. We had one particular award, actually the most coveted and the highest award that the department gives, that we did not do because for logistical reasons we didn't have that person available. So today we just got one, and we're going to announce the Director's Award, and I would like Mr. Dave Zaft to join me at the podium. I don't think he knew this. You know what? Dave Zaft is the perfect recipient of the 2019 Director's Award. He was nominated by his bosses and his peers for a reason, and that's because he is reflective of the professionalism and dedication that our people have to fish management in our fish division and across our state. He's one of the most dedicated, talented, innovative fisheries biologists, supervisors, leaders across our agency, 28 years with the department, and he has worked very, very hard to work on both native species restoration and also to provide exceptional sporting opportunities for fishermen across our state. He's been the management coordinator since 2012. He oversees our fisheries management statewide, 8 regional fisheries crews, the aquatic assessment crew, and also the statewide AIS crew. So he's right in the middle of pretty much everything that happens with fish, with the exception of habitat. So very, very engaged and involved. He has proven to be a very effective leader, organized, very logical and deliberate approach to solving problems, interacts with the public very, very well, has an attitude that it really provides influence to everybody that he's around. He influences people to want to do great things. He's been a member of many, many teams, internal and external. He's definitely known within the fish division as being one who can take on the most complex and the most challenging problems and find solutions that everybody can get wrapped around. He, like I said, he oversees the AIS program, and so that has, it's one of our highest priorities right now. It has been a high priority for about 10 years now, and he's been involved essentially since its inception. And you know what? The proof's in the pudding. And to this day, we still do not have any detected quagga or zebra mussels in our state, and that's due in large part to this man's efforts and the teams that he's led. He talk a little bit external. I've talked about what he does within the department. He's also worked to try to provide leadership for the entire West and actually for the entire country. He's worked on many, many conservation issues with the American Fisheries Society. He leads the Colorado River Cutthroat Trout Conservation Team. He's involved in the Yellowstone Cutthroat Trout Conservation Team and Bonneville Cutthroat Conservation Team. Participates in the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and these are all, interstate collaborative working groups, and that's where he thrives, and he does exceptional work. To kind of sum it up here, he's just a great employee, a very strong reflection of the greatness of our agency, and I'd really like to thank Dave and ask all of you to do the same.
Those are way too kind of words for me. So, anybody who works with me knows I drop the ball a lot. I fumble the ball a lot, and so I guess it just speaks to the team I'm surrounded with that we can still get things done in spite of that. So I appreciate this. I'm really surprised and humbled. Thanks. So.
At this time, the commission would like to recognize Representative Albert Summers. I think he was just here.
There he is. It's in the back.
Thank you, Albert. Greg Anderson?
It'll be fish division, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Alan.
Okay, Alan.
President Rael, Commissioners, Director Nesvik. Since we're having the commission meeting here in Pinedale, thought it was opportunistic that we could recognize one of our division employees that has 34 years of service and just recently retired, and that's Greg Anderson. Greg is our assistant superintendent at the nearby Daniel Hatchery, which just had its 100-year anniversary, and Greg was there most of the 100 years. Greg was there a significant amount of his career, and we really appreciate his service. Anglers from both within and outside of Wyoming have benefited from Greg's hard work. So going over Greg's career real briefly, he started in fisheries management, Buffalo, Laramie, and Cody. And that's where he launched his career within the department. From there, he moved into the culture section. He started as a spawning egg at the Story Hatchery in April of 1987. Several months later, he was hired as a fish culturist at the Ten-Sleep Hatchery. Then in April of 1992, he was ready for a new challenge and transferred to the Boulder Reading Station. In December of 1995, he was promoted to a senior fish culturist or assistant superintendent, as they're known as, also at the Daniel Hatchery. So Greg's been at the Daniel Hatchery since 1995. He's made a lasting impact with the brood stock development and management of the Colorado River and Bear River cutthroat species. And also with his tenure at the facility, played a vital role in meeting statewide fish production objectives and success with the statewide alpine fish stocking program. And that's where a lot of our fish are raised, is at the Daniel Hatchery for that alpine stocking program. Besides working directly with the fish, he had many other outstanding accomplishments during his career. This includes being an active member of the American Fisheries Society for over 30 years and serving in various leadership positions in that organization. Greg has also been the division's historian in relating to fish culture activities, and he's done a great job capturing the history of fisheries management and culture within the state. And he's going to leave a hole there for sure. And he's also been represented the department positively at numerous public outreach events, kids fishing events, and local celebrations, and the Outdoor Expo. And one last thing I'll mention with Greg is he's been a real positive role model for folks that have worked under him and within the division. He's mentored a lot of employees, and he will have left a lasting mark within the division. I want to thank you, Greg, for 34 years of service, 1985 to 2019.
Do we have someone here for,
Yeah, he's got it coming. John's got somebody coming.
okay.
President Rael, Commissioners, Director Nesvik, I'd like to take an opportunity right now to recognize some of our employees that received a national award from the Forest Service. Today with us, we've got Christina Barano. Christina, if you want to come up, please. We also had 3 of our fisheries management folks from Cody that weren't able to attend because of work schedule conflicts and hunting season conflicts. I have priorities, right? So it's not often that our folks get recognized. Well, they don't get recognized enough for their work. And to be recognized nationally, we felt was a pretty significant thing, especially when you're talking getting recognized from the Forest Service as a collaborating agency. You know, it takes time to put these awards together, and that those folks thought highly enough of the work that our people do to take that time is significant. So Christina and Sam Hohalter and Jason Burkhart and Joe Skorupski all received awards, what they call Rise to the Future Awards, is a Forest Service program. And within that program, there's 18 different categories. And our folks received awards in two separate categories. Christina, who was also very busy this time of year, and appreciate her taking the time to come over, is aquatic habitat biologist located in Laramie. Christina was recipient of Fisher National Forest Award within that Rise to the Future program. She also went to Washington, D.C. in June to receive, with Sam, to receive the award in person. Through a partnership with the Trout Unlimited, Saratoga Encampment and Rawlins Conservation Districts, and Brush Creek, Hayden Ranger Districts. They worked on projects since 2011, and Christina was critical in getting these projects to fruition in conjunction in that partnership. They improved fisheries opportunities for a total of 109 miles on the North Platte and Encampment Rivers and its tributaries. This collaborative process raised $3.5 million to complete the 16 habitat restoration projects. Christina's involvement with these improvement projects, in addition to the wild trout fisheries, also benefited native fish, amphibian species, and has raised awareness in stream restoration and watershed health. And I wanted to just cover shortly too, our Cody crew received the Public Awareness Award category. Sam Hohalter, Joe Skorupski, Jason Burkhart, and also Tara Hodges, I want to mention, was very critical in facilitating that process. They used a collaborative process, and if you remember, they also received Team of the Year award for the department this year. But they used a collaborative process to further the agency's efforts concerning restoration of Yellowstone cutthroat trout in the Cody region. Sam and Joe and Jason, Tara invested enormous energy to build public awareness and involvement in the collaborative process through emails, radio talk shows, various print and social media, posters, websites, and numerous public meetings. This project resulted in creating a work plan with strong, diverse stakeholder support that can guide Yellowstone cutthroat trout restoration in the Cody region for many years to come. So again, appreciate all your hard work. Like I said, it's pretty telling of your dedication to the resource and your expertise when you're getting awards from the national perspective. So.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Good afternoon, President and members of the Commission. I was going to take this opportunity just to acknowledge some of our hunter education instructors, but they work hard all year to prepare our hunters, and they are now enjoying the field, so we don't have them here today to recognize 10 of them, which have reached 1,000 hours in teaching students. But what we did want to do is take the opportunity today to say thank you to Commissioner Doobie for your commissioner's license, and I have Josh Corsi and Joey Fagel here with Muley Fanatic just to discuss what they did with that commissioner's license and their work that they did with these 10 outstanding hunter education instructors.
President Riel, members of the commission, Director Nesvik. It is very exciting to be able to talk to you about this. We often talk about our greatest resource in Wyoming, and that is truly our people. And this is a great opportunity to be able to recognize what I believe to be a tremendous effort. And I think it's worth noting each one of these individuals was reached out to individually, and it was quite simply a great phone call to be able to have to just not only congratulate them on their service, but also to ask them if they could pick a firearm that they would like to own in recognition of that service, what would that be? And so that was the challenge that we put out with each 10 of these individuals. And I'd like the opportunity to tell you these 10 individuals' names because I do believe they've achieved a tremendous milestone that'll pay endeavors beyond their living years. Bill Daniels, he chose a Tika Light 6.5 Creedmoor. Patrick Malson, a Bergara Hunter 30-06. A Ron Miller, a CZ USA 75 9mm handgun. Jim Johnson, a Glock 10mm handgun. Joan Eisman, a Weatherby Camellia 7mm08. Rick Johnson, a Ruger Predator 223. Gail Finelli, a Stevens Compact 20-gauge over-under shotgun. And then we had a husband and wife team, Patricia and Brian Mann, and both of them chose to select a CZ USA over-under shotgun, and Roger Warner, a Springfield Armory XD 9mm pistol. And I think to be able to make that call and let them be able to pick a firearm that they would like to have and add to their collection that was personal, I think it just added extra meaning to that. And I just would like to thank you, Commissioner Doobie, for the opportunity to facilitate the sale of this tag. The other portion of those proceeds went to the Youth Expo that was held in May in Casper, and again, we just would like to thank you. Commissioner Rael, any questions?
Joshua, I thought you were the newest warden when you walked up here.
Who plans these meetings in September?
Any questions?
I do have an update on the other commissioner license that were facilitated in 2019, and we've had the opportunity to work with some other organizations to help facilitate the sale of their licenses. There was 10 of them total, and it was pretty significant in our minds. $357,821 was the gross revenue, so about an average of $30,000 per license. Thank you for that. Thank you for the other organizations that reached out to us to help in selling their tags.
I wanted to also thank you guys for helping out. This is not the first year we've worked together to do this, and it won't be the last. As long as I'm commissioner, we'll have a license to do this, to provide firearms to our instructors. So I want to thank you guys for taking all that.
And I can tell you from the conversations with these individuals, it was a surprise, it was a shock, and it was very well received.
But I appreciate you guys' willingness to help out with that. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President, Josh, before you go, so tell us how much of that 300 and some odd $1,000 goes on the ground?
So the total gross was $357,823. The net dollars on that was $269,404. And the reason the difference between the gross to the net was some of these, particularly the one that came from Commissioner Byrd, there was a truck that was given away that had a pretty expensive cost associated with it, as well as a camper. There was 9 other prizes. It was the grand prize, but $269,000 on the ground in Wyoming from that.
So, and help me out, I mean, you're participating with the Bighorn, you participated with the Bighorn Sheep Research Project. We're firing up in Du Bois. You have the Wyoming Range Project. You have the Deer Project. What other projects does that go to?
So there was each one of there was the Cowboy Joe Club raffle, the Southeast Wyoming chapter tag that facilitated proceeds to the Deer Project, the Buck Fever raffle. The Big Rack raffle is what we refer to as the 10 Country raffle that stayed there in Fremont County, the Wyoming Hunter Ed Expo, the Flaming Gorge chapter, the Upper Green chapter, which has allocated their dollars to the Transportation Migration Project, Bighorn Sheep Project that was done in partnership with the Bighorn Sheep Center, the Wyoming Range Mule Deer Study, the Ultimate Buck Fever raffle, the Northeast chapter, and Sundance.
Okay. What, and maybe this is a unfair question, what's your current membership?
just shy of 8,000.
And that's in Wyoming, and now you've gone to other states as well, correct?
Yeah, it's not just limited to Wyoming. We do have 2 chapter efforts in Colorado, 2 in Utah, and 1 in Idaho. And we have a new one that just came online that has their first event scheduled 2020 on February 29th, Leap Day, in Winchester, Virginia, which is a little outside the box for us, but we were clear they did not misinterpret this to be an effort to restore mule deer to Virginia. But the guy who's leading this up, he's an avid mule deer guy. He understands that efforts need to be made out west, and he believes he can get birds of a feather to circle together back in Virginia. He's a property owner in the Alpine area, and he's very eager to get something done back there.
Mr. President. Josh, can you give us an update on the license, or the vehicle license?
Last count I had on the conservation license plate was 1,027.
So you're over the,
Over the hurdle, yeah. Had
Good job.
5 years to sell 1,000, and it was done. So
good job.
just keep going.
Thank you for all you do.
Thank you, guys. At this time, the commission and department would like to recognize Senator Mike Garou and Representative Andy Schwartz. Thank you. Go ahead, John.
Mr. President, members of the commission, Director Nesvik. This next item on the agenda, agenda item 5, is to discuss our strategies associated with addressing employee recruiting problems related to the high housing costs in Jackson. As you know, we've been spending a lot of time on this. By way of background, in July, the department presented to you a couple of options. One option pretty much focusing on trying to stay in Jackson, which was very complicated, and I'll go through some of that now. It involves trying to generate revenue and building houses or buying houses or working with some sort of an affordable option that we did not yet know about at the time. And option 2 was, if none of those options for staying in Jackson, if we could not find any affordable solutions for the commission's consideration, that the department would start to work on transitioning out of Jackson through attrition and on a voluntary basis. We did get some direction from you back in July to focus our attention on option 1. The department recommended some more time to work on that. These things take a lot of time. They're complicated. As you know, we've been working on this for a long, long time. There's not a lot of easy solutions out there, and certainly not a lot of cheap options when it comes to talking about housing for employees anywhere, and for sure not in Teton County. So you agreed to allow us some more time to work on option 1. Since the last commission meeting, I've made a couple of trips to Jackson. The most productive trip was on August 14, where I spent a day and a half meeting with folks in Jackson. I continued to work with one of the local county commissioners in the Jackson area, who's just been setting up different meetings between the department and different entities in Jackson. Spent some time meeting with the Jackson Hole Community Housing Trust, and we've discussed a little bit about that in the last few weeks. Met with the Forest Service, had a very productive meeting with the Forest Service. The discussion with them focused on where they're at with housing issues with their employees. All agencies, as you know, are having recruiting problems in Jackson. So this is not, we're not alone on this. So we've got some other agencies out there that want to work with us on partnerships. The Forest Service is certainly one of those agencies. We've had discussions at the local level with the refuge in terms of they have some housing on the refuge right now. We have some property, as you know, near the refuge that we've been interested in discussing with them. The discussions with the refuge on doing any sort of land exchange or anything like that has not been productive yet, so I continue to work on those options. Also spent some time in August working with the Jackson Hole Land Trust, an entity that if the commission were want to look at any of the properties that you own in Jackson in terms of trying to generate revenue to address the housing issue in Jackson, there may be opportunities to partner with the Jackson Hole Land Trust that we can talk about down the road if that's something we end up wanting to do. So there is, I've also had discussions with YDOT. YDOT is considering this as one of their high priorities too. Their time frame has not been quite as aggressive as our time frame is right now, but they have agreed to put together a team of folks, and I've agreed to serve on that team. They haven't met yet. When I get back, we'll try to get something going with them. If not a team meeting, perhaps we can, Director Nesvik and I can get with their leadership and let them know that our time frame's a little more urgent to see what type of partnerships that we may be able to pursue with YDOT. The options with those, with the federal land management agencies and with YDOT is they own land. And they are also in the same situation that we're in with housing. So there's opportunities to work on building houses on land that they own. So we've looked into what the costs of those options would be to build. We haven't looked at the costs of working with other agencies with a developer to come in and develop together, which I think is something worth pursuing for sure. I know we've had discussions in the past and talked about letting the department continue those discussions with those folks and bringing back a lot more information for a work session in November. And that's something that we certainly would like to do with the commission and any other information you'd like us to bring. What we would do at that point is, again, we could go over these options, which are pretty straightforward. Option one, like I discussed, if we're staying in Jackson, the options are pretty clear. We're either buying houses, which is not affordable at all, as you know, building houses either on commission-owned lands or in lands owned by the Forest Service, refuge, or YDOT. We haven't found any other land options for building right now. And that would be, and or working together in a partnership with an affordable housing trust or other entities. And the Forest Service, for example, is working with the Jackson Hole Community Housing Trust right now to address their employee recruitment issues too. So if we were to work with the Forest Service on one of their developments, that may involve work with the Housing Trust as well. So we will, I've gone over some of this information you haven't seen since July. Previous discussions with commissioners and questions that have come up have made me think that I should send this white paper back out to the commission, which I have, and we've actually updated this just a little bit. It goes over the cost of purchasing homes right now, the cost of building homes right now, where we could build those homes. It goes into some of the history associated with all the costs associated with being in Jackson. I can send this back out to the commissioners, and if the commission's comfortable, start working a little more aggressively with these other agencies, in particular YDOT, and be prepared to have a discussion with you in November with some pretty clear options for hopefully some clear direction from the commission at that point.
Any questions? John, I think that's the way we proceed in November, I guess. You'll bring us the options and the...
I think what I would do, if you're okay with it, is send this white paper back out. And this paper is available to anyone, and we'll put it on our website. People can look at this. We're being as transparent as we can on all the options in Jackson. There's not a ton of options. I pretty much went over what's there. We can get down in the weeds on costs for all of those options. But I think I could send this back out to you, and I think you'll think of other questions and other possibilities and ideas. And if you could get that to us as soon as possible in the next couple of weeks, we can try to be prepared. I'll try to have discussions at high levels with the Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife Service and anyone else we need to get answers on selling any department properties. We've looked at properties on your Horse Creek WHMA. We've considered discussion of the Teton WHMA. I can make sure I have by that point everything from those other agencies as far as any sideboards that may be tied with selling those properties.
Mr. President, go ahead, Mike.
John, I just got a question. Do we have any idea what the value of the Jackson office is?
The value of the office, I don't off the top of my head.
Is that something we could find out? I'd like to
Yes,
know that.
Absolutely. I think I've got that value. It probably needs to be updated, but I had the value 4 years ago. It's in my file. I'll just need to pull that out.
Mr. President, John, I guess this is more of a comment than a question. I just think that we're going to have a work session that'll be open to the public in November. We obviously won't take any action during that work session, but I think that the commission ought to try to, and the department ought to try to resolve this by, let's say, our January meeting. I mean, John, you just mentioned that 4 years ago you gave us the value of the Jackson office. That shows how long this has drug out. And I think for the department, for the fairness to our employees, and for the commission, we need to take action on this in say, January and get this one way or the other behind us. Decide to move to Pinedale, decide to pursue some type of option in Jackson or whatever. But I think we need a decision by January.
We'll do our best.
Any further questions? Excuse me, for John? So, John, the way we'll proceed is you'll send us information, the white sheet was what you called it, and then we'll
Right.
review it. Any questions that we might have, we'll get back with you and the department, and then we'll address this again in November on a,
Absolutely, if that's okay with the commission. Also, I'd offer going out and looking at any of these properties in the interim as well.
okay. Okay, thank you, John. We'll now have a call to the public. Kristen Gunther.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the commission. Kristen Gunther from the Wyoming Outdoor Council. And just, I guess, a brief reflection, not really a comment for or against either option. But when I think about the role that Game and Fish plays statewide, just as the state's wildlife experts, I think about the value that Game and Fish brings as ambassadors and experts, not only as law enforcement, to the public. And I think about Jackson and the fact that Jackson really exists as a hub around wildlife. People come from all over the world to take advantage of and see the wildlife and really engage in that ecosystem. And in that sense, I guess, it does seem like there's some value in having a Wyoming presence in Jackson, that if people are going to be here and hopefully know that they're in Wyoming when they go to Yellowstone, it would be great, to think about having a Wyoming message carried through and a Wyoming presence as people travel in to learn about Wyoming wildlife. That said, we understand that this is a situation with no easy solutions and it's not black and white. Housing in Jackson is a challenge for everyone. We're a lander-based organization, but our executive director is based in Jackson and is only able to be there because she has a deed-restricted condo that she eventually got through an affordable housing program. So I think everyone's really conscious of the challenges and understands why this conversation is necessary and happening. We'll do our best to do some outreach to the conservation community in Jackson prior to the November meeting to make sure they're represented. Although I can't speak for them. And I guess I would just say in general, if there's any help, any support we can provide as an NGO, either around that meeting or in any conversations with the county commission or the town of Jackson, we'd be happy to provide assistance in that. So again, not for or against kind of any of the options on the table, just wanted to raise, we do think there's value in the department being in Jackson if you can make it happen, and we'd be happy to help if we can. I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions by the commission?
You got any open lots?
Or money?
I wish. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you, Kristen. The commission would like to ask Senator Crew if he would like to speak to the commission or address the public in any way. Thank you.
President, members of the commission, good afternoon. My name is Mike Carew, and I have the honor of serving Teton County in District 17, or a big part of it, along with Dan Dockstetter in the Wyoming Senate. And also, for purposes of this discussion, I've been a business owner in Jackson. Next year will be my 40th year in business in Jackson and employing folks. And so I know all too well about the challenges about housing employees, finding employees, keeping employees, and keeping them in Jackson. Like you, I do a food service in an airport, and my contract says I have to be open 365 days a year, and I have to be open from the first flight to the last. So I can't afford the luxury of having all my employees live on the other side of the pass or in the beautiful town of Pinedale. Thank you, Representative. So I have to have folks that are in town, and so that means I have to pay. And so I do understand the challenges that you have, and I know Representative Schwartz is going to talk about some of the more value part of this discussion. But for me, I just wanted to bring up that, you know, we stand ready in Teton County to help you and to work with you on trying to find solutions to keep you in Jackson, to keep the Game and Fish Department in Jackson. We feel it's important. I look at the land that you do hold in Teton County and look at the value of that land. I know that Deputy Director Kennedy is going to give you some numbers. I could give you some wags on that, on what it's worth, but it's a lot. And you know, it's north of 40 million, I'm sure, without a doubt, and probably more. That having been said, I think that you have a lot of unique opportunities with our local housing trust, with our housing authority. I was in past life as a county commissioner and a town councilman, and I worked on some of the first affordable housing projects in the town. And our whole goal was to do that, was to keep people in the community that we needed, whether it was first responders, whether it was snowplow drivers, teachers, and Game and Fish is, like I say, Andy will talk about that, I think is right at the top of that list. And so I urge you to take the time to explore these options. I will help. I pledge to you I'll help. I'll be here at your November meeting. And I know I can speak for the commissioners when they and the council that they too stand ready to help. And you know, just as a way of saying, you know, I know it's been going on this is an ongoing issue for you, and it's an ongoing issue for all of us in Teton County. It truly is. And so what I can tell you is that as far, and I know I'm not telling tales out of school, but with regard to the Forest Service and the Housing Trust, they've been able to, even with the federal government, be able to get a memorandum of understanding signed where they are working together. They are proceeding. They are going to solve a lot of the problems that they're trying to solve. Like I say, even so, if you can do that with the challenges sometimes in dealing with the federal government, I think that we can meet these challenges together with the state, with the county government, and with the nonprofits. So with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Mr. President, Senator Grew and Representative Schwartz, I can't tell you how nice it is to finally be in a room with two other Democrats, particularly in Sublette County. I mean, it's just amazing. I have to hang out with these right-wing conservatives all the time, so it's just lovely to have you here. So thank you so much for showing up.
No
There goes the
comment.
neighborhood.
But thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
I do have a question. So we hear a lot about why everybody says it's important for the Game and Fish to be in Jackson. Why is that important to you specifically?
Like I say, I think Representative Schwartz is going to talk a little bit about it. But for me, since you're asking me personally, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. President, Commissioner, for me, it's a value question as far as what, you know, just take the representation in Teton County in the legislature. For over the 40 years that I've been in Teton County, there's always been a member of the Travel, Recreation, and Wildlife Committee from Teton County. And that speaks to the values that Teton County holds and the values that our citizens hold on these issues. And so to have that, I think, speaks volumes, whether it's Clarine Law, Ruth Ann Petroff, Representative Schwartz, myself, have all taken turns. Representative Yin right now, and our other representative, Orozco, is I think on there too. I'm not sure. Anyway, but that goes to the value that our community places on wildlife and on what you do. and the positive aspects that you bring, that the Game and Fish Commission, the Game and Fish folks, the biologists, to have there, and to have that supervisors, to have those folks, to have a game warden on site is important, and it's a value. It's a value for our community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Andy Schwartz, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the commission. Thank you, Commissioner Crank, for blowing my cover.
We might get hung tonight.
I'm not going to repeat what Senator Grew has said. I just have a couple points. The one, and I don't know if you've all visited the actual site, but it's located in between the Bridger-Teton National Forest office and the Visitor Center. We get ballpark 50,000 tourists a day. Many of them are walking near those buildings, and they will go into Game and Fish. And this is going to be, I worked in the tourist industry for 30-something years. Most of the people that come to Wyoming as tourists don't understand wildlife at all. I mean, as you probably realize, they like to pet bison. And the opportunity for these people to be exposed to educated people, to talk to about wildlife, and to get to know more about the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, I think is really important. And they're all going to go home. It's a wonderful office. They have a wonderful experience. When they go home, that's going to be an added value to them when they have come to Wyoming, when they go home. And they're right next to, it's right next to the elk refuge. If it's the right time of year, they're going to see thousands of elk. I really don't know how to explain how much value I think that brings. It's not monetary. This is not a business value, but this is a value for the Game and Fish Department and for all the people that pass through. The other point, this is not a unique problem to Game and Fish. We have many other state offices in Jackson. They're all going through the same issues. And I really worry the connection between Teton County and the rest of the state can be a little tenuous at times anyhow. I don't know if you all are familiar with the bumper sticker that says Jackson Hole only 30 minutes from Wyoming. There's a certain amount of truth to that. We have a very different character. And I really worry about the notion that state offices will pull out and make that connection even more tenuous. I think we need to do everything we can to keep that connection. And so I urge you to take that into consideration as you move through this process, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any further questions or
I
any
just got one quick one. You touched on it. A question I had in my mind was about visitors. You say you get 50,000 a day in Jackson. John, do we keep any kind of tally on how many visitors we get at the office in Jackson or any other offices? Okay. Thanks.
Mr. President.
Yes.
So Andy, I think the thing that everyone needs to understand is we are now solely funded by sportsman dollars. Several years ago, the legislature had the bright idea, I will say, to take away all our general funding. We really have a fiduciary obligation to our sportsmen to make sure that we wisely spend those dollars. So as you ponder this, and I hope you come back to our work session, I don't think anyone on this commission envisions closing our Jackson office. I think we would keep that open for just the reasons you mentioned. But do we need to have a regional office there with a full complement of wildlife, of game and fish folks? Or could that job be done from Pinedale at a greatly reduced cost, and I think we could better satisfy our fiduciary obligation to those folks who trust us with their license fees and all the other fees we're able to charge? That's the million-dollar question. So we're different than other state agencies, is my point. We're not generally funded like YDOT is, at least partially, or other state agencies. I don't know what other state agencies are there, but we truly have a unique fiduciary obligation that we need to fulfill as a commission.
May I respond?
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Mr. President. Commissioner Crank, I recognize that. I was on the Appropriations Committee actually when the process was begun to take both game and fish and YDOT off of the general fund. And I appreciate your fiduciary responsibility completely. I would say partially, there's nothing that prohibits the legislature, if the need arises, to use general fund money for doing something about this housing situation. It's, at the moment, we don't do that, but there's no statutory prohibition of that. As to whether or not, you leave a partial office open there, but remove a lot of the services, I guess, I was a county commissioner, as Senator Grew was. I did it for 12 years. I was a planning commission before that. We worked so closely with game and fish on a regular basis, dealing with the fairly significant wildlife issues that arise when you have the amount of residents. It's a growing county, and all of the tourists. It creates a lot of conflicts that require a lot of discussion and cooperative work. And I recognize it can still occur if the office is in Pinedale, but having seen how it can work with BLM, for instance, it creates distance creates problems in communication, setting up meetings, all of those things that I'm not sure will be beneficial to the state or Teton County. And like I said, I'm on a PROPS. I did county budgets for 12 years. I have my own business. I'm pretty cheap. I get it. But I believe there are other values that are not monetary that need to be considered.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Any comments?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. Angie, can I invite you to the podium? Thank you.
Hello, Director Nesbitt, Mr. President, Commissioners. I'm here today to give you a status update on Governor Gordon's Migration Corridor Advisory Committee. As you guys know, the governor created this committee back in June. And this committee was formed with 8 people representing all sorts of different interest groups. Industry, both mining and oil and gas, county government, landowners, conservation, recreation, and sportsmen. I'd like to point out that Dan Stanton is here with us today as one of the committee members representing sportsmen, and also Commissioner Schmid, who represented the commission on this committee. So this committee met 3 times, 6 days in the last couple months. And just overall, I'll take a minute to reflect that this committee was very impressive to watch. 6 long days. However, there was a lot of work done prior to the meetings, during the meetings, and here just in the last couple weeks as well. They were committed, thoughtful, engaging, and really they respected each other and each other's point of view. The department's role was really one of technical nature. We gave several presentations throughout the 6 days. We also were there to answer lots of questions. And then there were other presentations and technical expertise in the room. Petroleum Association of Wyoming, wind energy companies, mining, Bureau of Land Management, Office of State Lands and Investments, Wyoming DOT, and then a few of our research experts, Hall Sawyer and Jared Merkel as well. So this wasn't necessarily a public engagement opportunity, public process. However, there were lots of public opportunities. Each day, there were 2 times set aside during the day to take public comment, and all the meetings were open to the public as well. As you know, the group was charged with answering over a dozen questions, and then following that with an overall recommendation to Governor Gordon on how to proceed forward migration corridor policy. They just completed these recommendations last week, and you can find the recommendations on the governor's website. And in fact, they also did a webinar as well, open to all the public, to explain them in further detail. Overall, I'll give you just an overall sense of the recommendations, and then maybe I'll turn it over to Commissioner Schmidt for his evaluation of the process as well. Overall, the committee is asking Governor Gordon to pursue an executive order to codify a state-based set of policies. What this does, from my perspective, is it takes it off of the Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service and puts the regulation on the state permitting process, very similar to the sage-grouse executive order. Secondly, changes to the designation process. There was a lot of conversation over the 6 days of wanting the department to complete the biological risk assessment prior to the designation. Thirdly, to develop local working groups for each one of these designated corridors, involving a cross-representation of interest, similar to what this committee had. And this working group, the idea behind most of it is that they'd be able to look at other things. The department looks at the science of the corridors, and the working groups would be made up of local representation that would know that local corridor, and that would also look at other things like the economics of different decisions. And then lastly, one of the main issues that came up was a change in the law that would require commercial solar and wind development to go through the Industrial Siting Council regulatory process. Those possible developments that would occur in migration corridors specifically. So with that, Commissioner Schmidt, can I turn it over to you?
Sure. Thanks, Angie. I think for me personally, through the whole process, I think where our success was, in my opinion, is by changing up the way we designate the corridors, by having the game and fish actually identify the corridor, and then bring into a local advisory group selected by the county commissioners to help with the final designation or a designation of that corridor. Throughout the 2 years plus that I've been on the commission, when we've talked about corridors, we've always mentioned about the importance of landowners and folks like that, how their opinions are brought into that process. And I think that's what this result has given us. It's going to give us not only landowner opinions, but generational landowner opinions that see things that, that we don't see every day. It's going to give us opinions from industry people that have spent a lifetime out there in the oil and gas patches or in the mining industry, what they see and hear and know every day. It's going to be brought into the process now, and that's going to be a part of this migration corridor designation. So I think that, to me, that is probably one of the most significant things that we've done through this process. That is along the lines of what you mentioned there with the renewable energy situation. I mean, that was pretty much a wide open area for them to go, and I think with this new law, if we can get this all done, that's gonna bring some attention to that area and will help us with that industry as well. So I think we've done some good work. It was an interesting process. I am interested now to see where the governor goes with this and how he handles it from this point forward.
Mr. President?
Yes.
So a question for Mike or you or Angie. I've been pondering this language in what you released for some time, so maybe someone can help me out. It's in a section entitled "The Oil and Gas for Mule Deer and Pronghorn." Let me just read it and then I'll ask you the question. Generally, the group has consistent recommendations for all industries that can have disturbance of habitat in their development of resources to support Wyoming's economy. These recommendations are on federal, public, and state lands where the project requires a state permit. That recommendation for oil and gas, as well as other industries, is to have development outside of corridors as a first priority. Inside corridors, the goal is to ensure the continued functionality and health of the corridors, as well as the big game. This can be achieved by directing project proponents to avoid and minimize disturbance with an emphasis on conservation of the designated high-use areas. We believe greater value should be placed on these high-use areas. And then this is my question. Decisions on projects should be made in consultation with Game and Fish using best available science. That consultation and recommendation would be approved or denied by the governor. So what is that telling us? The governor approves migration corridors or not, or what were you trying to say in that language?
Mr. Chairman, I'll take a stab at that, Commissioner Crank. It's not always extremely clear what came out of every aspect of the advisory committee, but I believe what that is referring to is how this would work is that the Game and Fish would continue to make recommendations on individual development projects case by case. The difference is, instead of those recommendations going straight to the Bureau of Land Management office, such as the oil and gas lease parcel sales, our recommendation would go to the governor's office, and then the governor's office would in turn make a recommendation to that entity or the state permitting entity regarding those leases.
Okay.
Commissioner Schmid, would you agree?
I would agree with that, yes.
But, but our recommendation goes to the governor's office to go relay. It's not an absolute relay. The governor's office has input onto that and could adjust, change it, agree with it, do whatever. Is that correct?
Chairman, Commissioner, absolutely. Yep.
So it may very well be very well subject to politics and all of that. I guess my whole concern about the corridor thing is, in a nutshell, is, there's one agency in this state that's charged of wildlife and to look out for the benefits of the wildlife, and that's this department. And I feel they should be given wide latitude in coming up with the best science available to determine where the migration corridor is. I mean, the deer go where they go, the antelope go where they go. Now, what path they take and what property is under that, now we have to have big discussions on and how that works. But I don't want something like this to be political, economic, socio-economic, those types of things in determining where the wildlife go. That should have no bearing in it, or very little bearing in it. Now, like I say, how we handle that, that's a whole other issue. But I'd hate to see those types of things determine, well, no, we don't really like where they're going this way, so maybe we're going to funnel them somewhere else, or we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It's our job to show where that is, where that corridor is. Now, how we handle that, everybody needs to have input on. So, just my 2 cents on that.
And I don't see that happening, Pete. I don't see where these advisory groups or anything that the governor's office may do will try to change the actual corridor, if that's what I'm hearing you say, to try to reroute these animals the way we want them rerouted based on whatever information or direction any kind of group could give the governor. I don't see that happening. I just see this as a way to give the governor as much information as possible to make a good decision based on wildlife issues.
Mr. President, so when I first read this, I walked away, and I read it quickly, I'll admit, and I've been meaning to talk to you, Mike, but when I walked away from this, I thought, okay, now they've said the governor shall designate wildlife corridors. I didn't hear that today. What I heard was the governor would filter the commission and department's recommendations on individual actions, which I'm kind of with Pete. I'm still troubled by that personally. I mean, it's our job. I mean, we're like the Lorax of wildlife. I know you guys hate that when I use the Lorax book, but it's our job to support wildlife. And, that's our job. And the Office of State Lands Leasing, Office of State Lands, it's their job to maximize revenue for the school districts. Everybody has a role, and I think when everybody speaks, we end up at the right result. But I'm kind of troubled that the Wildlife Agency in Wyoming could be vetoed by the governor on a leasing decision. I mean, our voice is not heard then. We say, you know, as we've done, I think we've achieved a great balance. We've said, develop the oil and gas, but do it off of the corridor, if at all possible. If that gets overruled by the governor or the governor's office, then I'm troubled by that, because our voice isn't heard. Because all we can do, you know what, one of the confusions in all this is we have no regulatory authority to tell the BLM what to do, to tell state lands what to do, to tell a private landowner what to do. All we are is an advisory department. And I think that's important to keep in mind. And so, you know, I would hope the governor would listen to the department and the commission. I mean, they're his experts in this area, but I could envision a circumstance where if the wrong person were sitting in that chair, they might not listen to the wildlife side. So that's my wonderment.
Any more comments? Those are real good ones, real good concerns, and I'm not sure where this is going, but it's constructive
Yep.
talk, so.
Thanks, Mr. President.
Thank you, Angie.
Thank you, Angie.
Final call to the public for today. Dan Stanton.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commission, Director Nesvik. My name is Dan Stanton. I'm out of Green River, Wyoming. I had the pleasure and the honor to serve on the Governor's Migration Corridor Working Group with Commissioner Schmidt. Really, I just wanted to come up today and talk about the great personnel that you guys have. You do a good job of recognizing them here, and I think they get a little bit of public acknowledgement. But Angie Bruce and Doug Brimmeyer and Megan Lockwood were at every one of our sessions, and the information they provided was invaluable for us to be able to do our work, along with some other agencies and NGOs. But those people from your organization were a great representative of the game and fish, and I appreciate the effort that they put into that. So that was all I had to say today. I'd be happy to take any questions if you had any, but I think you covered it with Angie.
Any questions?
Appreciate your help.
Yeah, thank you for your service.
Thank
You
you.
too,
Thank you.
Commissioner
Thank you
Schmidt.
very
A lot of
much.
work.
Representative Albert Summers, please.
Mr. President, thank you, and fellow commissioners, thank you. One thing, I just want to welcome you to Pinedale and appreciate the fact that you came here, and hope you enjoy it here, and I hope you take the time to look around at all we have to offer and the wildlife that we have. I know you know that. So really what I'm coming up to talk to you about is an issue that I've been pushing for some time. About 4 years ago, my local river guides, so this is going to be about commercially guided fishing boats, and my local guides started giving me a call and saying, you know, the amount of demand on our rivers is increasing exponentially, and what are we going to do about it? Is there anything we can do about it? And in that length of time, since 4 years, I think YFOG they tried to develop, they're still trying to organize, so that's like Wyoming Fishing Outfitters and Guides Association, and one of their first meetings was here in this very room, and they invited me to come, and they talked about the same thing, is, you know, how do we maintain this resource that we love? How do we have regulation, basically, of that industry? And so I've continued to listen to different folks, and I brought out a bill last year late in the session and sat on it, but I wanted it numbered so I could ding people so they'd know that that issue's still out there. And in the interim, it got assigned to the TRW committee as an interim topic on whether or how we should regulate guided fishing trips. And so the bug I'm putting in your all year, and I've put in your leaderships here, is I want to put it back on you guys as well, is this is an issue. Trust me, it's an issue. You look at all around us, look at Montana, Idaho, Colorado, with the exception of Utah, they all regulate fishing guides in some way, shape, or form. They either regulate themselves, or there's a department that regulates them, and they regulate the rivers. So in Montana and Idaho, you look at certain rivers, certain stretches, there's certain number of boats that are allowed to go on those stretches. And we have that in Wyoming to a degree, because we have BLM does that, the Forest Service does that, the Park Service does that. Our state lands does not do that. It was mentioned before that they have a different mission. I think we need to have a discussion with them on that mission as it relates to this particular issue. You all don't do that. You all don't look at any stretches or your own accesses and say, are these accesses being overused or underused? And so I think what I'm trying to do is start a discussion with you all, is help me find a solution to this. It may not be this session, it may be after I'm out, but I'm probably going to continue to work on this for a period of time. And so I would encourage the commission and the department to think about, it's really a golden goose in Wyoming. You know, they often call the oil industry the golden goose of Wyoming, but if you think of one of the new golden gooses, it's definitely river outfitting. The increase in that, you look at the number of out-of-state fishing licenses. I got those numbers from John, and I can't remember them, but it's 1.8 million or something dollars that you get in out-of-state fishing licenses. It's an amazing number, okay? And so we need to be able to manage this resource in a manner that maintains the quality. I'll admit, biologically you got the fish, but do you catch the fish? And how do you handle that? It's a social question, right? It's maybe not a biological question. But at some point it could be a biological question. And I would argue that you have really only three options. You can decide the creel limit, you can decide the method of take, or you can close a river. And I think that's not a very wide range of options for a department or a commission to regulate that resource. And so just challenging you all to think about this, put some thought into it, give me your ideas, and once again, thank you for coming to Pinedale, Wyoming, in Sublette County. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. I guess we'll close now. Can we adjourn? And is there any further call to the public? Yes, Kristen.
I apologize, Mr. President. I thought I had a blue sheet for this. I just wanted to briefly make a couple of comments on the Governor's Migration Advisory Group. First, I just can't echo enough what Dan and what Deputy Director Bruce said earlier. The people who were selected to serve in this committee were all incredible. Dan, I can't thank you enough for your thoughtful input and your engagement. And Commissioner Schmidt, I can't imagine better representation in that group. It really was. I was in attendance at all of the meetings of this group, and it was exhausting just following along with what they were talking about. It really was a tremendous amount of work and thought and time investment, so thank you for that. Just a couple of reflections. One, the Outdoor Council presented on behalf of the conservation community in terms of our best thinking on how to reach a compromise on migration corridors. We had a great substantive conversation that day, I thought. One of our key points was ensuring, just as Commissioner Doobie and Commissioner Crank have raised, that the Game and Fish's authority as a wildlife agency be respected, and that authority for designating corridors remain with the department. That's something we'll continue to turn our attention on. Please, either of you correct me if I'm wrong. My recollection is not that the committee felt any clear motivation to take any authority for designation away from the Game and Fish. So there is an open comment process going on right now, open until October 11th. We will be submitting comments, and that's something that we will continue to emphasize, that Game and Fish needs to have authority over wildlife decisions in the state. Yeah, I guess that's the main thing that I wanted to emphasize, and just to say thank you. I mean, we presented a lot of tangible ideas to this committee, and it's not the direction the committee went, but ultimately we felt like the committee worked really hard to find compromise and find a sensible solution that really did meet the needs of everyone who came to the table. And I was kind of in awe of their ability to do that. So obviously there's many details to be fleshed out. It's a long document of recommendations, and it's a long road to get to the executive order. We'll continue to be engaged and be supportive. But thank you to both of you for your engagement and the department for your work on this process.
Mr. President, can I, no questions for you. Albert, can I put you on the spot?
Thanks, Kristen.
I should have asked this earlier, but where do you think it fits, Albert? Does it fit with the Outfitters Board, or does it fit with, I mean, the regulation of fishing guides is what you're calling for essentially, but does it fit with the Board of Outfitters, or does it fit with the department?
So, Mr. President, fellow commissioners, I'm listening to that debate, okay? I created one that gave you the authority. You could equally create one that gave the current Outfitters and Guides Board that authority. You could create another Outfitters and Guide Board. And I'm drafting actually 2 more bills on ideas I have. You can regulate the boat. You don't even have to regulate the guide. You can regulate the boat. I think one of the biggest issues, and this is not answering your question, but I think one of the biggest issues and one of the biggest challenges is that the federal government, the federal land management agencies, they don't have the personnel, and people can say, well, I see them Todd told me, well, I see them driving up the road every day. Well, the people that are tasked for that purpose, they don't have enough of them. They don't have the money. The Forest Service is broke, in case anybody's checked, but they can't even do roads. And so the challenge is there's regulation on these federal stretches of streams, but there's not enforcement. State of Wyoming, on state lands, we're choosing not to enforce at all, or to even look whether we're overusing that resource in certain areas or not. So I think there's a whole wide variety of things, and I think there's different routes we could go depending upon the appetite for guides. In the state of Wyoming, typically, we're not going to regulate somebody unless they want to be regulated. If guides come together, and it's like getting ranchers together, right? But if you could get guides together to find some of those solutions, that's what I'm going to ask those questions. So I'm going to have a meeting actually in Jackson on the 19th and the 21st at 6 p.m. and in Pinedale on the 20th at 6 p.m. And I've tried to invite a lot of guides, and I've reached out. I want to hear those answers myself.
Then the last question is, how do you fund it? I mean, you need additional regulation either from state lands or the department, or, I mean, I don't want to give the feds money to regulate, but how do you fund those state agencies to take care of the additional burden? That's another question. I don't know.
So, Mr. President, Commission, there's a couple of routes I've looked at, and one bill will have all the routes I've figured out in it. One is, you can, if you want to charge for the boat, you can put a charge for a sticker on a boat. If you increase, and I know this sounds pretty harsh, but if you increase out-of-state fishing licenses 50%, you generate quite a lot of money. In the end, I think other states have had their state agencies develop MOUs with the federal agencies on how they manage these streams. And I would hope, and I'm trying to find out some answers to these questions, does it include enforcement? If it does, how do you pay for it? And so in the end, I think it's got to be from those that use it. It'll either be the guide or the fisherman.
So you can tell me to go to heck or whatever on this next question, but I know you're involved in this, but sage grouse banking, where's that at? Where are we at? Where are we going? And you don't have to answer if you don't know or don't want to.
Mr. President, that's in a committee of the legislature, and they are reviewing that, and There's a draft bill that I think was brought up, and I think it's a bare bones bill. That bill, left alone, would basically leave it to a agency to, by rule and regulation, create the entire process. Probably there needs to be a few sideboards on that bill, in my opinion. But I think that's, people around the state of Wyoming need to weigh in on it. What do you think about it? Me personally, I think that whole credit system has some challenges. I don't disagree with mitigation, but I think when you decide that you are going to maintain credits in perpetuity, regulate that and oversee that, that's a challenge. It's not, we do it all the time, right? We do it all the time, but it's a challenge. I think it has to be done carefully.
So we still haven't decided which agency might regulate that. That's still up in the air, and we're pondering that.
Yeah, I think that, I haven't even heard rumors. I know where I'd put it, but that's not necessarily where anybody else would put it.
Okay.
It just, as long as I got the mic and I got to ask questions, so I'm going to throw one back at the good commissioner, Mr. President, if you'll allow me.
Absolutely.
And that's on, one thing on the migration issue, one thing about wildlife management. If we all left, there would be no need to manage. So the reason we have wildlife management is because people exist in the landscape. We're not really managing wildlife so much as we're managing the human presence of wildlife in that landscape, whether it's the number of hunting license you issue or not issue or whatever. We're managing people. So in a lot of respect, what you all do is not just manage the wildlife that exists there, but you manage that relationship between man and animal. And so it will always be political. It will always be political. And what you have to do is do your best. You have to put out you, the department, must put out good information, the most reliable information that exists. That's your job. But the decisions you all make are always political, and it is all about managing that interaction of human and wildlife. So, and I wish you the best in that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Summers. I appreciate that. We'll have a final call to the public now. Please.
Pete Ehrenbell.
Pete, would you please state your name?
My name is Peter Ehrenbell. I'm a rancher and landowner here in Sublette County and Sweetwater County. We ranch along the southern half of the eastern part of the corridor. We are located from the Big Sandy River to the Colorado border. We migrate back and forth just like the deer do, except we don't stop at I-80, we keep going. The reason I want to talk to you is to follow up with something that Albert said. We're one of the people that you'll be making decisions about in this wildlife decision. We have a lot of scattered land tracts that will be affected by the NSO or whatever other thing comes out of this migratory corridor. I have gravel pits, we graze, and both of those things can be affected by your decisions and by what's going on here. The southern end of the corridor in my country is in good shape, okay? My nearest neighbors are 25 miles away and 9 miles away. We don't have development in our country. Yes, you do over here in the east and the western side. And the permitting of those oil wells and gas wells over there has affected that landscape dramatically. But a one-size-fits-all decision is not going to work. Our country is in good shape, okay? I worked with the Bighorn Sheep working group for years and years. If you set up these local working groups, I think you need a third-party facilitator. I don't think the agency did a good job with bighorn sheep. This mountain range that's behind us is devoid of domestic sheep. There were 30,000 head of sheep when the Bighorn Sheep Committee working group started. There's none, 0 in the wilderness. I think there was an agenda to stop grazing in the wilderness. I think that the Game and Fish was on board with that, and I think the job got done, mission accomplished. There is no sheep grazing up there. And so I'm afraid for our industry that the bighorn or the mule deer corridor may yield the same effect on our permits. Okay, so, you know, we're a renewable resource. We produce year in and year out. We have paid land taxes. Our company is 115 years old. We can do this and not affect the corridor. The corridor hasn't affected us, and I don't think we've really affected the corridor. Those deer come through us every year. They have for 115 years, and they do fine. So if I lose my development rights or my ability to produce minerals off of my deeded land or lose some other right, then I want it monetized. If your decision is going to take those rights away from my property through regulation, if I can't access it, if I can't build a house, I can't put up a power line, can't build a road, then you've taken my rights without paying for them, without an easement. You've done it with a pencil. And I think it's a taking, and I think it should be monetized. So that's what I want you to consider when you start thinking about how you're going to close areas off or how these things are going to be.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Pete, I got to push back just a little bit. I absolutely agree with much of what you say. You know, that your people and Albert's people and all these ranchers in this country have lived sympathetically with the wildlife for hundreds of years. I mean, those wildlife have used those paths, and you've grazed right over the top of it, and it all works wonderfully. So I absolutely agree with you on that, but I just have to push back. I mean, it's our job to manage wildlife, and so to do my job right, we need to make sure we make science-based make good recommendations. What the BLM does with that, I can't control. God knows I wish I could. We would have delisted wolves 10 years before we delisted them, and grizzly bears, we'd be hunting them this fall. But we can't control those federal agencies, so all we can do is make recommendations. And so I think with great ranch families like yours and with Alberts and people, we can work cooperatively and figure this out. But I just can't agree with you that if we make a recommendation that someone shouldn't drill in the middle of a stopover area or a high-use area, and that they should try to push that surface activity off on the side, that we're taking anything from any private landowner, because we don't have that authority, nor should we ever have it, Pete. I mean, I would fight to the ends of the earth that the Wyoming Game and Fish Department should have the authority to tell you what you can do on your private land or what Mr. McGagna can do on his private land. That'd be wrong.
I understand that, but you know, the drilling and mining takes large tracts of land, and we have intermingled land among that. And so when you recommend that this area not be drilled, and I have 80 acres with mineral rights in the middle of it, and everybody says, okay, well then I'm out too, you know. And you guys have a lot of influence. And I've been down this road. Game and Fish says it's the BLM. BLM says it's the Game and Fish. I mean, okay, you know, it's politics again. But you can help us too, you know. You can take our side on some of that too. That's all I'm asking, is when this stuff comes down, you think about that. When there's no way I can get a road because it's in a designated corridor, what does a designation mean? What is this going to do to us? That's what I'm asking, right? What are those parameters? That's what I want to be thought about a little bit too while you guys are doing this, okay? Because, you know, I don't recognize anybody in this room nobody was there when we brought that water out of those mountains and broke those meadows out, drilled the wells or put in the reservoirs. We were the only ones out there doing that then. Now everybody has an opinion about what goes on in my world. Okay? We were the first ones there. We did all that. Now everybody has a hand in it because it's public land. But we've done a damn good job with that public land. But we're shrinking. You know, everywhere I look, I'm losing neighbors. So that's all. Anything else?
Pete, I respect the hard work, and most of all, I respect your opinion, so
Thank
you. We'll come up with something that's
We
comparable.
would have, Wyoming would have scant wildlife populations if it weren't for our private landowners. I mean, I forget the percentages, but 99% of the wildlife live on private lands and need private lands to survive. So I hear you, Pete.
Well, I think to
It's an
get,
important partnership.
yeah, you keep that partnership strong. Keep us, you know, keep us in the forefront of what you're doing because you're going to need us. We need you.
Plus, you're the only guy I know that ever roped a wolf, so I kind of like you.
That you know. Thank you.
Without any further questions, we'll have a call to the question to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll now adjourn. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow at 8.